Your routers and your switches and all your network devices are about to become a lot more, what's the best way to say this? Dumb. Controller-based networking, software-defined networking, is going to change some of the jobs your router and your switch would normally have. It's going to take some of those things away. But before we talk about that, let's look at the jobs they have. Let's do a quick review of the planes. You know, the 787, the 747, the 750. No. The data plane, the management plane, the control plane, the three planes that describe what jobs your routers have and the functions. We kind of organize the functions of a router into separate areas. Let's talk about that. The three planes of our routers and switches. The first plane, management. This plane of the router is all the protocols that enable us to remote into our routers. So, Telnet. Don't use Telnet, but it's in there. SSH. Use SSH. Use that. SNMP. When we're monitoring and collecting statistics on our devices with our network monitoring stations, we use SNMP, right? That's part of the management plane. And even, we've been talking about this quite a bit, APIs. APIs are part of the management plane. It's how we interact with our routers, our switches, our wireless access points. For now, that job is safe. The router can have that job, those functions. We're going to let them keep it. Kind of, a little bit. We'll cover that in a moment. The control plane, the brain. As its name might tip you off, the control plane controls pretty much everything that happens within your router or your switch, and more specifically, how data flows. Contained in this plane are the protocols we know and love that you've been learning through the CCNA. We have things like the OSPF routing protocol. So routing decisions. How do your packets know where to go? Well, the control plane decides through protocols like OSPF and other routing protocols. They're there, just not in the CCNA. Other important things too, like NAT, Network Address Translation. ACLs, Access Control List. You can't come here. You can come here. You know, this is the rules of allowing packets access. More specifically for switch control plane, we got Spanning Tree Protocol, STP. Keep those loops blocked. Other examples, CDP, Mr. Rogers' favorite function in a Cisco switch or router, the Cisco Discovery Protocol. Hello, neighbor. VTP, MAC address tables, QoS. I mean, the list can go on forever. It's everything that controls how messages, frames, packets are forwarded and received on a router, just how data flows. And that leads us to the data plane, because everything we've talked about in the control plane controls how the data plane acts and does things. The data plane is anything to do with sending, receiving, processing data. Some of those functions might be encapsulation and de-encapsulation. It's in charge of matching the layer 2 addresses to the MAC address table. The MAC address table is still formed and filled by the control plane, but the data plane's in charge of matching it up when packets come or frames come in. And also things like dropping traffic. Like if traffic hits an ACL, the data plane's in charge of dropping it. So basically anything to do with data flowing. I like to think of it as a road, which is why I made the symbol a road. It's just data flowing through things, and then the control plane determines how that data flows, where it should flow, the rules governing it. And the management plane allows us to go in there and mess with the control plane, kind of control the brain. Coffee break. Oh my gosh, that is such good coffee. Oh, I made good coffee this morning. What are you drinking today? It doesn't matter what time of day it is. You can drink coffee all day. I do drink it all day. I tell you all this because there's about to be a huge upset. The router's going to be upset. Some of his jobs, and the switches too, some of their jobs are going to go away. We're about to give them a lobotomy. We'll cover more detail on that in the next nugget. But let's talk about one more thing, and it's how autonomous our devices are. Right now, how this works, what we see here, each router and switch and every device having their own brain, having their own control plane, kind of, it's called a distributed control plane, meaning that every device pretty much calls the shots for their own brain. I'm going to drag some more routers over here to illustrate the point. When we configure things like OSPF, each router and their brain has their own OSPF process. They're autonomous, in a way, because we still control them via the management plane. We still got your brain. And the way they interact, of course, is they form neighborships and they exchange routes and stuff. But the point I want to hit home here, and the reason it's called distributed, is because each router runs their own OSPF process, their own calculations. It decides who becomes its neighbor. I mean, obviously, we enter commands in each router to control that behavior, but still, all that logic lives. There we go. Lives right here on the router in its own brain. It's distributed. We may have our grand OSPF design that we've planned out, but we still have to go configure each individual router. We have to program each brain to talk to each other and make that happen. Distributed. And that's what we've been doing for a long time. That's traditional networks. That's what you learn with the CCNA. But we're about to upset that. We're about to upset our routers and switches. That's going to change the game. Controller-based networking, software-defined networking is going to come into play. So in this nugget, we looked at a review of our planes. We have the management plane, SSH, Telnet, things we use to access our routers. We have the control plane, OSPF, spanning tree protocol, things that run the show of how the data plane, our next plane, operates. The data plane's in charge of forwarding and receiving messages, frames, packets. Those are the planes. We're about to mess it up. I hope this has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.